Africa. Die Kranze antwoord keer, sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land.
Oh, say, can you see? Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. The brave.
Distinguished guests, honorable chairs, and esteemed delegates. What is the purpose of Model United Nations? What real impact does it have on the society? What could 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16 and 17-year-olds possibly do over the course of this conference to effect change? Because at the end of the day, all we really do is dress up fancy, act sophisticated, and pretend that our solutions are going to resolve world problems. It's become more about participating in the activity rather than fulfilling the aims of the activity. But I won't lie. I was no different to any of you sitting in the audience here today. I really did enjoy indulging in the culture of MUN. I remember my first conference, which was 5 years ago. Man, I was so into it. The delegates of of the Republic of Congo. I was this 13-year-old boy who thought the whole conference revolved around him. I was walking with my chest puffed. I was shaking people's hands. Instead of saying hey and hi, I was saying good morning and good afternoon. I was even drinking coffee when I hated it. But it was part of the role, so you know how it goes. You gotta fake it till you make it. But the point I'm trying to gather from this is that it was always about being a delegate. The goal was to be the best and most influential figure in the room that would always have his resolutions passed. But not once was about tackling the issues at hand. It wasn't about the displaced women in the DRC. It wasn't about the poorest families suffering from Zimbabwe's financial crisis. It wasn't even about the 8, 9, and 10-year-olds in the Horn of Africa that would be going to sleep on an empty stomach. And that's what I changed. That's what I want each and every single one of you to change. To make it more about the issues and less about your role as a delegate. When I asked earlier on what real impact does this conference have on society, truth be told, it's never really been a matter of effecting true change. Because it's not about whether or not our resolutions here today are going to change the world. It's about starting to truly understand the severity of each of these problems. As soon as we understand, as soon as we care, as soon as the lives of others start to matter to us, effecting change will no longer be a responsibility given to generations. It will be a duty they wish to take upon themselves. That's the purpose of MUN. The problems that plague this world are real. Sadly, most of them come from this very same continent. A beautiful continent, by its resources, its landscapes, and mostly by its people. But the conditions in which it exists overshadows all its beauty. What ought to be a powerhouse has been reduced to only a portion of its capabilities. Because of this, the majority of the people who inhabit this space truly have nothing to show for it. I myself don't exactly come from a privileged background. When my mother decided to go back to school after having me at 18, I came to Johannesburg to live with my grandmother. However, she was a domestic worker living on the premises of her employer. Hence, I was never really able to see my mother. But she got fed up and eventually, her and my father found a place to rent. But we soon came to learn that all three of us living in a single bedroom was extremely inconvenient. Inconvenience was a theme that transcended throughout my childhood. It came in all shapes and sizes. Some inconveniences were more drastic than others. But what most of you might see as unfortunate, I choose to perceive as a very privileged life. With what my parents and grandmother have, they've given me more than I could have imagined. The fact that I go to a school like AISJ emphasizes their efforts towards ensuring a better future for me. They have given me the potential to change both my life and the lives of those surrounding me. However, this is not the case for many children born onto this continent. Most aren't given the opportunity to become something. Instead, they're stuck in the same cycle that their parents and grandparents came from. But this harsh truth is made inevitable by the conditions surrounding each individual. I mean, what potential does a child born in a refugee camp have? What about that who eats 3 times a week? I guess the question I'm really trying to ask here, what does the future of most African children look like? And so the theme, Empowering Africa. Africa is an extraordinary continent with great potential, but its people live in conditions where the focus is surviving and not living. It will come nowhere to fulfilling its expectations if this is the case. Hence, uplifting the people is how we empower the continent. This is why it's so important that the lives of others start to matter to us. Change on this continent will start to happen as soon as we make the well-being of others a priority. That's why I'm asking all of you to make it about the issues and not about being a delegate. Because if we teach our generation to care, our generation will be the first to effect change because they want to, not because they're told to. When that's the case, people start looking for solutions that matter. People start working on solutions until they work. People stop doing things to get it done. They do it to see progress. And therefore the future of Africa, once again, rests in the hands of the youth. The 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16 and 17-year-olds I spoke so dismissively of. They're the ones who ought to determine what Africa looks like 50 years from now. And that's why my appeal is to them. That's why my appeal is to you. Because the next few years are going to be defined by us. But I'm confident in this generation, our generation. The fact that all 350 of you have chosen to be here today is on its own an illustration of a social consciousness. It shows that you are all aware that there are things wrong in this world that need to be fixed. But for now, today, and the rest of this weekend, I don't expect you to change Africa. There's only one thing I hope you take with you from now onwards. There's only one thing that I hope my words here today have inspired you to do. And that one thing is to care. If you're in the Human Rights Commission, care about the displaced women in the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you're in the Economic and Social Council, care about Zimbabwe's financial crisis. Whether you're in the APQ, the Environment Commission, or any of the other remaining committees, care about each and every single topic you encounter. Because as soon as we start caring, more change will start happening. Thank you.
Some nights I stay up, cashing in my bad luck. Some nights I call it a draw. Some nights I wish that my lips could build a castle. Some nights I wish they just fall off. But I still wake up, I still see a ghost. Oh Lord, I'm still not sure what I stand for. Oh, what do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know anymore. Oh, 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 oh. This is what I'm waiting for. I'll break through already. I was never one to leave behind. Same about black and white, try twice as hard and half as cycle. Begin to jack my style. That's alright. I found a martyr in my bed tonight. She stops my bones from wondering just who I am, who I am, who I am. Oh, who am I? Ooh. Well, some nights I wish that this all would end, 'cause I could use some friends for a change. And some nights I'm scared you'll forget me again. Some nights I always win, I always win. But I still wake up, I still see a ghost. Oh Lord, I'm still not sure what I stand for. Oh, what do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know. Oh na na, oh na na, oh na na, oh na na.
bear the weight of tomorrow, the burdens of the past and the questions of the present, intertwined in our desires for well-being and prosperity. So rise, leaders of tomorrow. Let us lift our voices to the skies and pray for a better day. And hand in hand, let us empower this beautiful land.
Oh, come on.
Come on.
But I still wake up, I still see your ghost. Oh Lord, I'm still not sure what I stand for. Oh, what do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know anymore. Whoa, 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 whoa.
And now I would like to invite the director of our school to just give us a few words. Thank you.
Secretary General, Deputy Secretary Generals, distinguished chairs, and honourable people. It's lovely to have the opportunity to speak to you and lovely to have the opportunity to welcome you all here. I'm not sure that I've ever come across a better dressed audience in my life. I am certainly not the dress code police here, but from my viewpoint you will look great. And congratulations on turning out so well today. Those who know me well enough know that I never write a speech. And that's mainly because when I do write a speech, I tend to try and read the speech, and I guess I feel I lose the connection with that audience. But today was one of those good times not to write a speech, because I'm always following somebody who spoke so eloquently about the concept of service and about what we need to do in this world. I need to share that I've just come back from Frankfurt, where I was working with a group of schools that we've joined in unison to look at ways which we can solve some of the ways we do education. And of course I was surrounded by the recent German election, where there was a large swing to the right in terms of many people voting against Germany's response to immigration. But what I saw light was, and when I talked to many Germans, it was interesting this swing was not amongst the youth or the young people. In fact, the polls dramatically showed that the young voters of Germany didn't vote right. So maybe your comment about the fact that the youth of today and the future generations are going to be better informed is holding through in the data that we do. And I hope that's the case. Not a knee-jerk reaction, but a reality that we must do for others. One of my passions has been trying to help this school have a balanced program. And in having a balanced program, one of those concepts that we've talked about is service. And what I felt we heard before was talking about we may not be able to change the world. It is our attitude to the world that dominates our thinking. It's the attitude to the world, it's our attitude and caring for others that will dominate our mindset and the way we move and think. And it's always reassuring to me that as a school, we help support individuals coming out of that school with a belief that it's not important necessarily who you are, but what you can also do for others. And I have not heard it spoken as eloquently as you did earlier, so congratulations and thank you. What I would like to say, however, while you are here to discuss those issues that are so prevalent, and be very mindful of what that happens, you're also here to learn. You're also here to learn about the way things happen in the world. And probably to some extent even be frustrated that you're realising how hard it is to make decisions, and probably understand sometimes how hard it is to get to consensus and agreement and bring people along. But that's a challenge. It takes diplomacy. It takes tact. It takes thought. It takes intelligence. It takes hard work. I want to encourage all of you to learn through that. And if you're that 8th or 9th grader who are here for your first or second JoMUN, or you're the 12th grader who's seen it all before, put those skills to action. Put those through the processes and try and work hard to find those resolutions. Listen to your fellow colleagues. Debate hard, debate fair and thoughtfully. Above all, trying to find answers to the world, but above all, learning what it's like to be a delegate in a complicated world. On behalf of the board of the American International School of Johannesburg, the faculty, the staff and the whole community, it is great to see so many of you here participating in such a worthwhile activity, and I hope you have a thoroughly brilliant conference. Thank you.
And up next, we're going. Thank you, Dr. Andy Page-Smith. Today, we're going to have a keynote speaker. And today's keynote speaker is a skilled and inspiring lady that worked intensively with the United Nations Developmental Program for the past 13 years. Following her work with the UN, she decided to establish her very own interactive digital media company called Afros. By overcoming the challenges she's faced in her line of work, she has built herself a successful reputation. Delegates, I bring to you Mrs. Shongwe.
That's the most intimidating walk I've ever done in my life. Good morning, delegates. You really look beautiful. I happened to have the privilege last week of being in New York during the UN General Assembly and was held up in traffic as I tried to cross the street because one Donald Trump was getting to the UN to address the UN, and we were held up for 45 minutes, but had the privilege of being in the room. And as I listened to him, the one thing that I thought he was going to say, and I think he was trying to say, but he didn't say, was exactly this. Let's shut it down. Let's shut down the UN. Because we're not going to put our resources into the UN. And I suppose one of the questions I want you to deliberate this week is, would it matter? Should we? Should he just shut it down? Not that it's all about him, but he has a big influence and a big purse. Should we care? Here are some thoughts. And if you go to the next slide. As Amu so eloquently said, in a country like South Africa, and I don't know how many of you are from South Africa. I understand you've come from many countries across the world. South Africa has developed and built itself this notorious reputation of being the one country in the world that has the most number of women who are killed by their intimate partners. So they're 5 times more than any other country in the world in terms of femicide. I know for any of us who associate ourselves with South Africa, who love South Africa, this is a statistic that we are ashamed of. We don't want to celebrate, Amu? But it's the reality. And it's got all kinds of historical reasons why that is the case. It translates to 8 hours, every 8 hours in a day, one woman is killed. So when I did sort of the calculation, it's about 1,100 women who are killed every year. These are the sorts of issues that I thought that you should be worrying about. What's interesting about that statistic is that it's mostly from intimate partners. It's your boyfriend, it's your lover, I don't know, it's your drug dealer friend, it's your husband. Either way, it's a familiar stranger. Let's go to the next one. Beautiful child sitting with his parents. In Malawi and in Tanzania, every year, nearly 10 albino children are murdered for their body parts. In Malawi, you earn about 140 rand a month to be able to work on a farm. To be able to get body parts from an albino child, you can get paid 140,000 rand. So when you weigh this, what's blood on your hands for 140,000? And a chance to get out of poverty. These are the complexities that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis across this African continent. The question is, who should take responsibility for this? And who does take responsibility for this? Each government is responsible for the protection and the justice of its citizens. So in South Africa, given the statistics we have about violence against women, we have the Minister of Police declaring a national security crisis. We have a call center where women are supposed to call to be able to really try to reach out and get help. There's multiple programs that exist that the government has put on the table. But despite that, we still have these statistics. So clearly, somehow our government seemed to be doing quite a lousy job. So let's move to the next slide. This is an image of women from Nigeria who were somehow managed to break away, and they're in Portugal at this point, and have managed to break away from a sex slave trade, where they've been kidnapped from Nigeria and transported across the world and ended up in different European countries, and somehow the Nigerian government managed to pull them together in Portugal to be able to bring them back home. The next slide will tell you that what this figure does is that globally there's over 27 million who are in what is called modern day slavery. And the way that this story works, a woman called Griselda Grootboom just yesterday was addressing the United Nations. She, a survivor of sex slavery, where she was picked from Khayelitsha in Cape Town by a friend who said to her, I know you're desperate for help and for freedom. I can show you a way how. And her friend introduced her to this trade, took her to Johannesburg, where she said she smelt something fresh and hopeful for the first time. She was forced into sexual servitude. Her first client was told there's fresh meat. And as she walked into the door, she was locked up. She was drugged, she was beaten, she was repeatedly raped. And in one instance was assaulted so badly that she woke up in the hospital a month later. Fast forward, and Griselda, 10 years later, was in the Middle East, transported across the world over what she believes, and she's not sure, are over 8 different countries. She managed to escape eventually with the help of another African sex slave who was with her in the Middle East country. And today she lives with HIV and has constant migraines and other headaches and issues that she has to deal with. So as Griselda talked about this, the question that she was asking the UN, why is it that I had to figure it out myself? Where were you? Where were you when I was crossing those 8 countries? So whose responsibility is it? Is it the government of South Africa from where she was kidnapped? Is it the government of Zambia from where she was transported? Or is it Kenya? Or is it the Sudan from where she was then moved to the Middle East? Who is responsible for her? Perhaps it's the destination country. But imagine this, across Africa, there are 800,000 women like Griselda. Many of them stuck in no man's land. The next slide is cliche, but this is what the United Nations sort of looks like and does. And I have the privilege of spending some time there every year as part of the negotiating team that sit down and try to worry about women like Griselda who are stuck in no man's land and need to find their way home. And so I really do think there is a place for intersectoral, inter-country, intergovernmental, cross-border institution like the UN is. And I know that many, many of us question its relevance. Many of us doubt its effectiveness. But we also have the African Union. So in Africa, the African Union, the United Nations work hand in hand to figure out how to make this thing happen. But despite all these efforts, and we spend hours debating, negotiating, coming up with different policies, there are still 40 million people across the world, over and above the 27 million women, who are out there as slaves. Modern day slavery it's called. But only about 10,000 convictions. That's an indictment. Why? Why only 10,000? So as you deliberate, I want to ask you this. Why is the UN not as effective as it could be? Is Trump justified to contemplate shutting down the UN? I think there's a key problem here that each of you is going to have to deal with. And I know you represent different countries as you sit here at the Model UN. You see, every country that sits at the UN carries with it the burden of its own belief system. If you come from the North, you have a particular agenda, and right now, most countries of the North are dealing with, migrant labor that they don't want to have because perhaps they're bringing terrorism into our backyard, right? You just talked about Germany. From the South, we're dealing with the fact that we've got these huge issues of brokenness and scarce resources, real constrained resources. And leaders who sometimes prefer to use their money that they have to amass their own personal wealth. And they have patriarchal. They're men who don't believe that women have the right to sit in the same space as they do. So all of this beliefs, all of this is carried into the same environment where you're supposed to have this debate about should we or should we not traffic these women? Are they or are they not sex slaves? But in my home, I believe that a woman's place is like a sex slave. So why would I sit at the General Assembly and suddenly change that view? This is the complexity that is the United Nations. And it's a complexity that we, as we sit here in Africa and try to figure out what an empowered Africa could look like, have to negotiate our way through. And so how do you stand above it? How do you make sure that you are so strategic that you understand what every single country's view in that room will be? And this is what happens in the negotiations. You get to know and understand. Watch that. And I saw this year. There was a big debate about paternity leave. The US is not particularly keen on paying their employers paternity or maternity leave, whereas the Norwegians will pay 18 months of paternity leave, right? Middle Easterns couldn't care about that either. African countries are trying to push for 3 months at least of paternity and maternity leave, right? So I watched in the room as a US woman struggles across the room to a Middle Eastern man, and they're having these negotiations. And I'm thinking, what strange bedfellows. But because it's in their interest, they will sit together and try to craft some place in this negotiation so that their interests are above the interests of the others. So is the United Nations worth it? Should it be a place that is a collection of so many different perspectives? I would like to say that for those of us who work in the Secretariat, and that's what we are in the Secretariat. We are not the United Nations. The United Nations is member states. The rest of us serve as the team, like the people who are running around the back and who are doing all that kind of work. That's who we are as the Secretariat, right? We're 44,000 of us across the world. And we move like a slow, monolithic institution. We're like a big ship that's trying to move across these muddied waters. And so we're not going to be agile and innovative and creative and thinking about, ideas in new ways. And so as I turn to the last slide, and I listened to what Anu said about young people and the hope that there is. No, the one before that. You recognize these guys, right? Do you recognize them? No? It doesn't look like mirror, mirror on the wall? You're Generation Z or Z, right? You're the generation who are digital living generation. That's your life. Your social life, everything is online. Is it not? Primarily. So I ask you as you deliberate here, yes, we still have the structures of the UN that allow you to sit and try and do your negotiations. But I would rather want you to reimagine another way. Because what I think, as I sit here and I imagine, this is just the Johannesburg Model UN. There is other Model UNs that are happening across the world all the time by young people like you who are not conformists like we are, who are ready to challenge the status quo, who, from what I read about Generation Z, and I happen to have them living in my house every day, and have to try to negotiate my way through them just to ask them to do some simple things that we used to do automatically. And suddenly, you have the connectivity to everywhere in the world at the touch of a button. So could we begin to imagine a totally different Model UN? Could we pick an issue? I really am enthralled by this issue of modern day slavery. I cannot believe that in my lifetime I am seeing slavery again as we saw in our history books. It is present in our lives today. So let's pick one issue. Just pick one issue, Amu. Let's say modern day slavery, right? I don't know what else. Maybe the women that you're talking about in the Congo. And decide that every single Model UN is going to decide in 1 year, we are going to mobilize against this issue. And that we're going to put all our energies on Snapchat, on Instagram, on whatever other names that I don't even know because you guys don't want us to know. And that you're going to try to find a new way to build the negotiations that we countries and governments are failing to do as effectively as you could. I really want to challenge you to step out of the constraints of the environment that we have created as the United Nations. We have made successes, and I'm not putting it all down. We have made huge efforts, especially with resolutions. But 20 years down the road, despite the resolutions, we have been unsuccessful in ending the fact that we still have 27 million women who are slaves today. So open it up, young ones. Rethink it. Reimagine it. Draw it differently. As you think about these over the next 3 days, I really, really challenge you that if Trump does shut down the UN, it's all right, because you've got it. You have a new way of shaping this. Now you can put the mosquito on. And I leave this with you. If you think you're too small to make a difference, clearly you've never spent a night with a mosquito. Thank you.
Thank you to Ms. Shongwe for that really wonderful talk. We're actually now going to open her to a Q&A session, so if I could get some admin up here. No? Okay, we'll do it ourselves. So does anyone have any questions?
now working? Yes. So I feel like one common interest that the majority, or at least everyone in this room, probably has is the fact that we are sort of all aspiring to enter a field relatively similar to this. We are concerned with international relations and international ordeals, and we like to partake in different ways to try and solve them. So for those of us who are interested in doing something like you, how did you get where you are? What did you study? And how did you make your way to working with UN Women?
It's never a straight path. And I don't think it should be. I did not want to join the UN after seeing the grey suits. And so I decided that I was not going to spend my time at the UN in the early days. And so yes, I studied international development. So I have a master's degree in international development from the American University in Washington, D.C., who actually specialized at the time in the Human Development Report that is produced by the UN every year that actually challenges the status quo on how the economies of our countries are measured. So it was, at the time it was considered quite heretical. Of course, that's the 20-something years ago. And now it's commonplace that when you measure countries, you don't just measure their GDP, you also look at human development. So you look at maternal mortality and life expectancy and other things that show you a much more balanced view of the country. So I studied that. And then after working 5 years, and I did all kinds of fun stuff. I worked as a lobby in the US actually for the sanctions bill that was being passed against South Africa, apartheid South Africa. And I worked across the US, and I was completely shocked at how I found cowboys in rural areas who cared about South Africa sanctions. So I used to go and provide them with information about where the anti-apartheid movement was and so on. I worked for the National Council of Negro Women that worked on international development and connecting African women across the world. And it was only 7 years after graduation that I joined a management training program within the UN. So they had a management training program. If you want to go into a professional role, you have got to have a master's degree. So they won't take you in with just the first degree. So you'd have to have a master's degree and around 5 years of experience. My message really to young people is don't step into the UN too young. It's too bureaucratic. It's not innovative. It's not very dynamic. It's okay to go in as an intern and sort of feel it, but I can guarantee you you'll be doing photocopies. If you go into an NGO that's small and agile, you get to work with the issues that you care for, and you get to learn how to work in an agile way, work in an enterprise, a social enterprise, you know, get to understand the struggles of trying to resolve big problems from a small base. Work in the government if you can, you know. So try, my advice would be spend a good 10 years working across different types of institutions, getting to really understand what do you enjoy, what do you really care about. Because it's one thing to care about an issue. It's another thing to understand that you need to sit down and write policy documents, which are a total bore, work through, you know, negotiations, design programs, try to figure out what you really feel and enjoy and where you impact and where your voice is. And then when you join the UN, you make sure that you're joining in a significantly high position where you can influence. Because if you enter too low, you actually can get stuck in a low position. There's usually like an NGO coalition, like a coalition of civil society organizations. I would work with civil society organizations, but I would pick an issue that I really, really care about, because you would be motivated by that issue. And I would then volunteer there, you know. My daughter Kwezi was working in a child's home for orphan children, and there were 2 young German volunteers who spent a year there. And I can guarantee you that however tough that experience was, they will have emerged from that experience transformed. And so I would enter through them. I don't want to prescribe organizations. But you can, you know, and one of the things that we may be useful for as the United Nations is that I could tell you, if you come to me and you say, I'm particularly interested in, I don't know, lesbian and gay rights, right? I can point you to 5 different organizations in South Africa, in Kenya, you know, who work on these issues and who I think would make it worth your while. I would also check with them and see, you know, do they want a volunteer? Because there's some organizations that are not so good at dealing with volunteers, you know, and then others will really get you the right work, because otherwise you might find that you're sort of sitting in this space and not getting used properly as you would need to be. But use it, volunteer, go out there, job shadow, understand what people do, so that you understand, and really try to understand what you care about. Because, you know, sometimes we're really good at criticizing, we're less good at doing the thing. Yeah?
This is more of like a general knowledge question, sort of, but I wanted to ask, what are some of the top priority problems that especially the UN women are facing, and how do you think that, like, us as youth can raise awareness for that type of stuff? Sorry.
My immediate instinct was to ask you what you think. And the reason that was my instinct is that I can give you a platform, but I need your energy. As I ended in my speech, we don't know how to do things differently. You know how to reach other young people because you do that every day, right? And young people are desperate for care and support and connections and inspiration and encouragement to do things that will transform their lives. But if I look at the issues we deal with at UN Women itself, you know, violence against women is top of our list. And in South Africa, we're considered the epicenter, along with the Pacific Rim, we're the epicenter of violence against women and girls. So that's a huge issue. And what to do in that space, there's different things. You could work from a media perspective in terms of reporting and capturing information. You could work in a police station, supporting them to gather information. You could work on a call at a call center. You know, so there's multiple things that you could do in the space of violence against women on its own. The other big one we work on is around political leadership and leadership of women in general. So we work with private sector companies and challenge private sector companies. We know now that if there's just 30% women in the leadership of any organization, listen AISJ, if there's 30% leadership in any organization, you will see a stronger bottom line because the women in there change how the business is run. So we work with companies to push, to make sure that they push their leadership numbers and that they're bringing in more women in there, that they're pushing for equal pay. So there's a lot of advocacy work around that. And again, social media, we do work with social media, etc. We work with economic empowerment of women. So women entrepreneurs and enterprise development is a big, big issue. Across Africa, 60 to 70% of women who are in the economic sphere or in economic activity are in the informal sector. So these are the women who sell cabbages and tomatoes on the street and who are running small spaza shops and kiosks and so on. Majority of women are in that space. So a lot of what we're trying to do is to work with these women to equip them to be able to move from that place of informality and survivalism to be able to actually grow into a more sustainable business. So there's opportunity there to think about what kind of mentoring and coaching and supporting, and sometimes it's just helping, you know, helping some of the trainers who work with them. So there's multiple things that we could do. Yeah, and we do bring in interns who come in for a few months just to get a feel for the job and just to try to understand how it works. So there's many, many opportunities. It's a great organization, and we're small, and I wish I could have showed you this picture. If you look at the way the UN is resourced, that's an issue for this debate here, right? World Food Program, UNHCR, there's refugees, those who are dealing with migration, which is the big buzz issue right now, they have this massive budget. So we call it the big blue, you know? So you see this big blue circle. And then other organizations get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Then at the corner, there's a red dot, literally a dot, like a pen dot, you know, like stop, like full stop, dot in red. That's UN Women, and that's how we're resourced. So even in the UN, we have the same biases that we have in governments. Women's work is always poorly funded, always. So we have to be super creative at trying to push differently. He for she is the last thing I'm going to talk about, and I talked about it when I was here before. We have a campaign across the world where we are mobilizing and bringing in men to join us in solidarity, because what we found is our conversation about women's rights has been amongst us and between us. So we sit down and we complain about it to each other, and life doesn't change, and the men keep doing their thing. So what we've done now is started a huge campaign we call He for She, and we bring in heads of state, and we challenge them. We challenge the president of Malawi. You know, as a he for she, what's going to be your prime thing that you do? And what he decided to do was to end child marriage. He actually has put a law now, has passed a law to end child marriage. And 3,500 young girls who were married between the ages of 11 and 14, their marriages have been annulled as a result of his he for she decision. We have corporate CEOs, global corporate CEOs, PricewaterhouseCoopers, McKinsey, Barclays, Unilever, all of whom have taken on a challenge. And I'll give you just one example and I'll be quiet. Unilever decided to take the issue of advertising as what they would use to change women's gender equality issues. They found that they spend billions every year on advertising. And in their advertising, they very often stereotype women. So they have an ad that for men, a cologne or whatever, a shampoo or whatever it might be, and somehow there's a woman half naked on it, which is really irrelevant to the use of that shampoo. And so Unilever has now taken a decision to unstereotype. It's a big campaign called Unstereotype. And they're challenging Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble and all these other big companies that deal with advertising in a big way to unstereotype their ads, so that we break away from the images that enforce women's inequality just because of how they advertise. So it's a whole lot of fun stuff that we do at UN Women that, you know, that you could do.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Is everything? Okay, cool. So welcome to JoMUN. I'm Krista. This is Sharif. We're the co-DSGs. And now we're going to go over housekeeping, best part of any kind of opening ceremony. But it is really important, so please pay attention. Cool. So actually, I'm first going to start off with why we're here. So as Emil actually mentioned in his speech, a lot of us get really wrapped up in the idea of being a delegate and cooperating with people and, you know, pretending we're these made-up kind of UN employees. But really why we're here is not to be best delegate or to win, you know, out of all the people in your committee, but it's to collaborate and work on our skills of diplomacy, and really to provide solutions to important issues. And these are issues that are affecting people globally. So we do expect you guys to please be sensitive and to be mature when you're handling them. Have fun, but be a little bit serious as well.
All right, so if you don't already know, we have a press and tech team. These are the people you will see walking around with cameras or the ones engaged in writing articles in the library. The team is led by Samita, and they devote themselves entirely to writing articles, taking nice pictures, and publicizing our conference. If you are interested in knowing about what is going on in our conference, then you should definitely check out our JoMUN Mashup site. The Mashup site holds the latest articles that are being published by our hard-working press and tech team. If you go to our school page, which we refer to as Final Site, you'll find the JoMUN Pages link. From there, you just click on the next external link called Mashup, and it will take you to a page asking for a password. As you can see, the password is Johannesburg, and these simple steps are all it takes to learn more about what is happening at our conference. Lastly, do not forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We do have Snapchat as well, so please follow that. There are papers taped around the walls of the school, and they have the Snapchat code on it, so please take note of that.
So, following Press and Tech, we also have our admin. Press and Tech and admin are really the backbone of our conference. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do anything at all. They're headed by Ellen, the president of Secretariat. So please treat them with respect. They are there to help you out, but they are also there of their own volition. So please be respectful, be polite, and be nice to them. They're really sweet people.
All right, next slide. Oh, previous slide. All right, so delegates, important that you are aware of this information, so just please take note. The nurse's office is by the buses to the left of the activities office. God forbid, in case of an emergency, the teacher director in your room will take over. For further information, the emergency handbooks are in your committee rooms. As Krista mentioned, our admin are the backbone of the conference, so a lot of stuff runs through them. If you need any help, such as printing or finding, or if you don't know where a room is, then please ask the admin. Our admin president, Ellen, will most likely be in the library as well. She's a very valuable resource. So just in case you need help, please come to her.
All right, so the Indaba Social, it's a social we host every JoMUN, and it's going to be on Saturday night. It's a hotel by Joburg. And feel free to bring a change of clothes with you on Saturday. Make sure it's appropriate. Don't wear anything really like revealing or anything like that. There will be a cash bar available. Non-alcoholic beverages only will be served, but you do have to pay for them. So you will be provided with water, but sodas, juice, things like that, please bring money for that. Oh, and also, yes, parents must arrange transportation for all of you guys. Buses will not be provided.
All right, so hopefully all of you have received your name tags. If you have not, then please ask one of our admin for assistance. Without your name tag, you won't be able to get any food. For the pure sake of ensuring that lines do not get too congested, we have a staggered lunch schedule, meaning that certain committees will have lunches at certain times. You were all in specific rooms yesterday for lobbying and merging, but these rooms will be different. If you don't know the rooms, they are in your name tag. And in the situation that you don't know where your room is, AISJ is kind of arranged in like an upper, middle, and lower fashion. So the U rooms are on the top, and then there's the middle rooms, and then there's the lower rooms.
So discipline, not the best thing to talk about, but in committee disciplinary issues. So if a delegate is acting up in committee, please guys, don't make inappropriate comments, don't be disrespectful. It's all just common sense. You're all here for a reason, please behave. But basically, you're just gonna go, your chair will speak to you, and then they'll call myself, Sharif, or Amo, and then finally, if the issue's not being resolved, it will be referred to your teacher director and one of ours, like Ms. Singleton or Dr. Maloney. The dress code, please adhere to it at all times. If something does not follow dress code, we will ask you to change, and if you're unable to change, we will ask you to go home. So please be mindful of that. Additionally, guys, our kitchen staff are here, and they're really, really busy trying to make food for some 400 plus people. So leaving things on the tables, like right now, after you all came in, the courtyard was a mess. There were coffee cups, there were, bags of chips, things like that. Please clean up after yourself. It's not difficult just to take something back to where you found it or throw it away. We don't have people to clean up after you.
All right, so as mentioned multiple times, JoMUN really challenges a student in every way possible. So please, guys, do yourself a favor and really try to push yourself in this conference. The executive team and many others have been working very hard in preparation for JoMUN, and we urge you to take advantage of this special opportunity. During debate, push yourself to contribute positively to whichever resolution in every way possible, and don't just slam it. As my fellow DSG says, be constructive, not destructive. Lastly, don't forget to have fun. Thank you. Now we would like to bring up on stage the Secretary General to officially open JoMUN XV. 15.
Okay guys, so right after this you guys will all be going into your rooms. Could the teacher directors please make it over to the library for your training and an approval panel. And all in all, I just hope you guys enjoy this conference. Yes, I said you must care, but also have a lot of fun and enjoy it. And without any further ado, I'd like to declare the session open.
Before the Mohaya Axio